All right. Oh, more people coming in. Hold on one moment. All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to January's Wildlife Wednesday. Tonight, we will be hearing a presentation about Pacific walrus management from Devin Johnson, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wildlife biologist. He's with the Marine Mammals Management and Walrus Program. For those of you who may not know, I'm with Alaska Wildlife Alliance. I'm Chelsea Cook. I'm the communications director. AWA was founded in 1978, and we're the only Alaska-based nonprofit that is working specifically in wildlife. We have three main programs that we operate under. First is our climate mitigation, helping wildlife adapt to climate change, which I think will be touched on in this presentation with Devin. We also work to recover threatened and endangered species. And lastly, we are a voice for Alaska's wildlife in the decision-making spaces, which includes Board of Game. Our executive director is actually headed to the Wrangell Board of Game tomorrow, where she'll be representing AWA in the Southeast hunting and trapping proposals and the regulatory process. NatHab has been really generous to sponsor our 2025 and 2026 Wildlife Wednesday presentations. I need to update this slide. They are amazing. They deliver wildlife experiences and group trips, including trips to Katmai. So if you're interested, you can check them out at nathab.com. And just a little bit of Zoom etiquette. We'll have you muted for the whole time. If your internet's unstable, you can turn off your camera. I'll be turning mine off after this. And then if you have any questions as we go, you can pop them in the chat. And then at the end, we'll read through the chat and convey any questions to Devin. And lastly, thank you for showing up tonight. If you aren't already on our newsletter, you can find it right at akwildlife.org. And if you are interested in donating and becoming a member, you can also do that on our website. And our members are really what makes all of this work possible. So for now, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Devin.
Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks to everybody for being here. Hopefully you can see my screen all right. So, Devin Johnson, wildlife biologist with the Fish and Wildlife Marine Mammals Management in Anchorage, in the Walrus Program. So I was actually born in Anchorage. I went up to Fairbanks to do my PhD in wildlife biology. Wound up focusing on geofalcons and Arctic raptors. I wrapped that up in 2021 and kind of rolled straight into this working with walruses. So we'll be talking today about working with Fish and Wildlife Service and just general Pacific walrus research, conservation, and management in the context of a changing Arctic. I'll start off with just a little info about walruses in general, and we're going to get into some of the projects we have going on. And then we're going to wrap up with describing a couple population modeling papers we recently got published. So just kind of the order of walruses in general. Pacific walrus are one subspecies. There's also the Atlantic walruses over in the Baltic, in Canada, Greenland, and Svalbard, parts of Russia. We think there's about 30,000 of them. We think there's around 250,000 Pacific walruses over here in the Bering and Chukchi Sea. And then there's this little subpopulation in between called the Latte walrus, which is pretty understudied. There's somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 of those. But we're focusing on the Pacific walrus because it's the walrus we have here. We share it between us and Russia.
Devin, just one moment. I am just getting some feedback in the chat that your voice is a little garbled. I don't know if maybe it's your speaker system or...
Okay, let's see. Sure, there's too much I can do with microphone settings here, but I can try to speak up in case. And yeah, if it gets really bad, somebody please let me know again.
That sounds great. Thanks, Devin.
Yeah. So seals are really closely related with sea ice. Um, yeah, particularly the females and young, they rely on sea ice for a lot of the year. They use it as a platform to rest on when they're foraging. They eat mainly clams and worms and other benthic invertebrates. So, usually they're up there in the ice and falling down, eating and resting on these sea ice platforms. They also use it during migration to get where they're wanting to go. Ice is also really important as protection from wildlife predators. They're a lot safer on the ice than they would be on land. And it's also a safe place for females to give birth and nurse their young. Ecologically, walruses are really important as what we call bioturbators. Um, they're basically when they're floating down there, in the mud, they're kicking up a whole lot of nutrients and sediments into the water column, which really contributes to the overall health of the ecosystem. Some people refer to them as like a keystone species or an ecological engine because of this. But just generally, they're very important to the health of Arctic marine ecosystems. They're also a really important food source for their predators, which includes polar bears, orcas, and humans. Here's, yeah, we'll talk more about this, but here's a photo we got of they're getting a walrus calf just this past year. And here's a really interesting photo from Diane Okanek of orcas going after walruses. Walruses are also very important to both indigenous communities, both in Alaska and over the border in Chukotka. And these communities have been harvesting walruses for thousands of years. It's still more important as a subsistence resource today for food, economic, and cultural.
Devin, sorry to interrupt. Maybe if you speak slowly, the garbling it is a significant garbling, and we want to hear what you have to say.
Cool. See if microphone settings did anything there. Otherwise, they can, um, yeah, step
That
out.
sounds a little better, even right then. I think maybe just slower. It is, yeah. I'm not sure what is happening with the garbling. It's only like on some words, but yeah.
We can also pause for 2 seconds, and I can try to hook up some headphones, which might have.
Yeah, let's try that. Yeah, we can definitely pause, and that sounds great. Thanks, Devin. Sorry about that.
Sorry. Go to use some headphones, so hopefully that'll help. Can you hear me?
I think that's a bit clearer. Yeah, it's a little quieter, but I think it's clearer.
So yeah, it's that. We'll have some of the major viruses, along with some of the more important walrus hunting communities. Um, in red are communities along Alaska's west coast that are represented by the Eskimo Walrus Commission. In blue are some communities in Bristol Bay that also have walruses, represented by the Kayasik Walrus Commission. And then in green are some Russian communities that harvest walruses as well. I've also highlighted St. Lawrence Island here. There's two communities, Campbell and Savimba, which are kind of Alaska's big walrus hunting communities. They account for about 80 to 90% of Alaska's harvest. So I'll go over a broad view of walrus migration and species. Walruses have this really interesting migration pattern where, for the most part, the males go one way and the females go another way. So we'll start in the winter, early spring season. Most of walruses, both male and female, are concentrated in the northern Bristol Bay. This is their breeding season, and they hang out in the sea ice habitat in various spots, sort of on broken leaves and polynias in the sea ice. Then, as the sea ice melts through the spring and moves north, the females and juveniles move with it through the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea. Females are also giving birth during this time on the ice, and yeah, moving up into the Chukchi Sea to these productive feeding grounds. All the males move south to coastal haulouts in Bristol Bay and on the coast of Russia. Some fall, especially in recent years, the sea ice has been receding further out past the continental shelf, creating this longer and longer ice-free period, which means females and their young have to haul out on land. And they've been forming these big coastal haulouts in the Chukchi Sea, and kind of waiting for the sea ice to come back. During this time, some of the males are migrating from their summering grounds to join before they move together back to their wintering grounds in the Bering Sea. So, yeah, sea ice is changing and sort of diminishing these past couple decades, and so changing sea ice regime means less predictable and longer ice-free intervals and more extreme weather patterns. And for walruses, this means that they need to spend more time, more energy to migrate and reach their food resources. It also means they need to spend more time hauling out on land rather than ice, where they're more susceptible to disturbance and predation. There's also more orcas around. There's evidence that orcas are moving further north and spending more time up in the Chukchi Sea. And polar bears, the same thing that's keeping walruses on land is keeping polar bears on land as well. So there's some thought that there are more polar bears around and they need to use walrus as a food resource more and more. And for ourselves, it also means more exposure to human disturbance, like from shipping, fishing, and oil and gas exploration, and just general changes to how walruses are using space and migrating seasonally. So, yeah, we're really interested in how these changes are affecting walruses and the subsistence users that rely on them. And walrus hunters are also experiencing changes to sea ice. There were quite a few media reports out there about cooperating with indigenous knowledge holders and hunters, talking about how the changing sea ice is affecting hunting and their access to walrus. Yeah, just generally, I'm noticing that changing migration patterns and weather and ice conditions are making hunting more challenging. They have an earlier hunting window. You need to go further across more open water to find game, and yeah, it's weather and ice conditions are becoming more unpredictable and dangerous. They're also more that it's getting more expensive. The cost of fuel and ammunition is increasing, and there's a decreasing interest in knowledge in younger generations of hunters. So yeah, just generally, it's become much harder for walrus hunters to access walruses these past couple decades, which has led to food and economic insecurity in some cases. In 2013, Savinga had to apply for federal aid relief. They declared a food emergency because they couldn't get enough walruses. So the Fish and Wildlife Service Walrus Program, we have me, wildlife biologist. We also have Irina Turkanova, who's a contracted wildlife biologist with our program. She's from Russia, lives in Seattle. Great biologist and leads our genetic mark recapture research expedition work, and also helps us coordinate with the Russians a bit. Joe Garlic was kind of a walrus biologist for a long time. He recently retired. He's got really big shoes to fill. We also have Cam Solano, who works with our mark tagging and reporting program, but is kind of an honorary member of our team. Just jumping the Fish and Wildlife Service Marine Mammals Management. We're focused on the conservation and management of Pacific walruses. And our office also deals with northern sea otters and polar bears in separate programs. We deal with regulations regarding the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act. We conduct research with USGS and other partners to advance scientific knowledge and promote the conservation of the population. And we work with Alaskan native communities and our tribal partners to monitor, harvest, and support co-management relationships with two main Alaskan Native groups, the Eskimo Walrus Commission and the Kayasuk Walrus Commission. And we really work together on a whole lot of projects for a shared vision of sustainable subsistence harvest and conservation. Last couple of years is trying to get a new Pacific walrus abundance estimate. It's a collaborative project between us, USGS, and the Eskimo Walrus Commission. And at least historically, it's been really hard to figure out how many walruses there are. Some studies back in the mid to late 1900s did these aerial surveys at coastal haulouts, but a large portion of the animals were either in the water or on ice, so they had to take some liberties with their estimations there. The first really precise abundance estimate for walruses came from this first generation of genetic mark recapture work that took place between 2013 and 2017. And it's using similar methodology to what I'm about to explain. So we'll just focus on that. But that's work yielded a more precise estimate of abundance than has been possible in the past. But with a mean of around 256,000 walruses, I think. So in 2023, we started a new generation of this genetic mark recapture fieldwork using some new techniques. It's called close kin mark recapture. So the basic idea is we're going out there, we're following the females and juveniles out on the ice and taking biopsy samples, getting a skin tissue sample from as many walruses as we can. Then we go back the next year and we do it again, and we can compare the genetics between the samples we got in one year to the samples we got in another year, and these statistics to get a reliable population estimate. So here we have some of our sampling equipment. We use these crossbows with arrows with a biopsy dart. It takes about an inch of skin, and that yellow thing you see on the tip there is a buoy. So yeah, we go out there, it really disturbs the walruses, and we're able to get a whole bunch of samples. So yeah, we've a series of research expeditions from 2023 to 25 to get genetic samples for this abundance estimation project, and it also allows us to get some other samples and information as well for other walrus research projects. So our first expedition in 2023 was a success. We wound up getting over 2,000 genetic biopsy samples. So we're based on a larger vessel out of Nome, and we spent the month of June following the sea ice edge up north. We wound up getting pretty much as far north as Wainwright in 23. And we're trying to find groups of walruses so we can go and launch our skiffs to get biopsy samples. We're also collecting walrus feces, water, and benthic samples for a couple partner projects we have going on: harmful algal blooms, disease monitoring, and diet studies. We also have a crew on board the larger ship that's doing age structure surveys for groups of walruses, trying to figure out different age classes, which is helpful towards our population information. It's a joint Fish and Wildlife Service and the USGS crew, and also through the Eskimo Walrus Commission, we were joined by Alaska Native hunters for this work as well, from Gamble and Sylvinda. We had pretty skiffs out there with us, and it was really helpful and valuable to have their insight reading walrus behavior and ice conditions, and really great to work with. So 2023 was great. 2024 was less of a success. We encountered some atypically heavy sea ice conditions on our way up in early June, and we wound up getting trapped in the ice for 17 days. And we were just kind of immobilized out there. A part of the ship actually broke. So once the ice cleared, we had to make our way back to Nome without even seeing walrus, unfortunately. But we kept high spirits and did as much science as we could, collecting some benthic water and sediment samples for our research partners. We began this past year and had some success. We were able to find some walruses and not get stuck in the ice, which was great. We did encounter some challenging weather and ice conditions, but we made the most of our few good weather days. Ended up getting around 1,200 samples. And we also got plenty of poop and benthic and other samples for our research partners. Also, really interesting, we had over 60 polar bear encounters in 2025 in the same area. During the same time frame in 2023, we saw only 2 or 3. So it's really a massive amount of bears we encountered up there. We also witnessed 5 polar bear walrus predation events, which was really interesting. And some of our coworkers are actually writing a paper about this sort of polar bear walrus predation stuff. We're hoping to get one more expedition out in June 2026, and that should meet our sampling goals, and from there we'll be able to produce an abundance estimate. We also did a lot of work with coastal haulouts. So here's a photo of a massive haulout over in Russia. It's called Cape Sertste-Kamen, where in the fall, the females and juveniles will go there, and they'll be joined by some of the males to make these massive haulouts, sometimes over 100,000. This is a screen cap from a really great documentary called Haulout, which is available online. It's really cool. I recommend it. It kind of explains the situation out there. Basically, what's happening is that with declining sea ice, and as the ice-free interval gets longer, walruses are spending more time on land at these really big haulouts. And when they're there, they're really sensitive to disturbance. from humans and polar bears and other factors. And when they get spooked, they can start a stampede that tramples calves and can result in mass mortality events. Kind of the first one that was observed, first time this was observed happening in 2007, was estimated that around 10,000 walruses, mostly calves and juveniles, died from disturbance events like this. We're working with USGS and Eskimo Walrus Commission and the local communities to monitor haulouts and reduce and mitigate disturbance events like this. So there's kind of two different types of haulouts. These big ones up in the Chukchi Sea, which are juveniles and calves and some males. And then the males have historically gone down to these submarine haulouts in Bristol Bay and along Russia. And in Bristol Bay, there have been some long-term haulout monitoring efforts with trail cams, acoustic recorders, and direct observation by a few different folks. Fish and Game has some work around island. Some refuge personnel at Togiak and Eisenbeck have cameras up, and then we have put some cameras up as well at a couple spots along with the Office of Law Enforcement. But this information is really good for getting a sense for haulout time, abundance and occupancy. We can also pick up sometimes disturbance events and other fine scale observations. We're a joint project to develop AI tools to kind of process some of this trail cam and audio recorder imagery. So hopefully get some tools available to us down the line for that. There have also been recent efforts to develop drones to survey big haulouts in Alaska and Russia to get haulout abundance estimate and density estimates for these really big haulouts where there's no way like a human could count individual animals. Just more about Round Island. This is one of the Bristol Bay haulout sites and probably the most well known. They think walruses have come there for thousands of years, and it's a really important spot for the Alaskan Native communities of the region as well. It is by Fish and Game. It's part of a larger Walrus Island State Game Sanctuary. It's been monitored them back to around the 1980s. There's over a few thousand adult males there during the summer haulout season, generally from around May to September. And Fish and Game has some staff on the island, and we're doing great work conducting counts, monitoring for disturbance, and working on other joint research projects, some of them with us. I mention it because if anyone are ever interested in trying to see the walrus, this is probably the best place to do it. It's in the same system as McNeil River, same process as McNeil River. Visitors can apply for a permit to stay on the island and photograph walruses. The Kayasik Walrus Commission has about 9 member communities, I think, and works with Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife Service to have a small annual hunt on the island as well. This is where pretty much all walrus harvest in Bristol Bay comes from, and it's only a couple walruses a year. We've also been developing techniques to monitor haulouts from satellites. It's really cool, but walrus are kind of one of the only wildlife species where you can easily see them from space. So Tony Fishbach at USGS did some of the pioneering work on this, looking at the efficacy of different types of satellites for detecting herds and estimating density and abundance. That group recently used these tools to estimate occupancy and abundance at 3 of the big Chukchi Sea haulouts in the fall to get after a population estimate that way. They think that when there's no sea ice, all the walruses are basing off out of the coastal haulout. So we're developing techniques to kind of be able to count them all and be able to get a population estimate from that. The Wildlife Service are working with USGS now to use the Sentinel imagery to look at abundance and species patterns at all of the occupied haulouts across the range of Pacific walruses. We think there's around 50 occupied haulouts, so it's kind of a good project to scan through them all and figure out where walruses are when, but it's yielding a whole bunch of really great information about walrus space use. On the left, we have a comparison of different types of satellites. This spot called Cinder River in Bristol Bay. Just this past June, around 5,000 walruses. Up top, we have it's called a Maxar image, really high resolution. This is like kind of what you see on Google Earth. The problem with that is there aren't that many of those images available. One thing we can do is reach out to the company and actually task a satellite. If we have a spot that we want to look at on a certain date, we can pay the money to take a photo. So that's maybe something we'll be doing in the future for select sites. It is a Sentinel-2 image. You can tell it's first resolution, quite fuzzy, but you can definitely tell there's walruses there. And the cool thing about this is it's publicly available, and there's quite a big catalog of imagery. There's an image every couple days for that. So really cool for getting after some of the seasonal occupancy stuff. Sentinel-1, which is a radar image. We can actually, in some sites, use radar as well to, it works even on a cloudy day. It penetrates clouds, and we can estimate whether or not there's walruses there and how many there are. We're also working with a group at Clemson. There's something to develop an AI model for processing some of these imagery using a different constellation of satellites as well. But in general, satellites, very cool, interesting new tool to look at haul-out occupancy and monitoring. So when walruses are at these haul-out sites, they're really easily disturbed by vessel traffic, among other things. And this is one thing that you can actually potentially do something about. We've developed guidelines for vessel and aircraft operators near haul-outs, establishing safe distances for different vessel types. And we've recently been playing around with AIS data to look at vessel traffic around these haul-outs. In the top image here, we have Cape Seniavin on the haul-outs with different radiuses around it, and each of these lines is a vessel, sometimes coming in within the established sort of recommended boundary for where they should be. We also have some sites where an automated network has been established. It's called a A to N, or actually, I forget what that stands for, but it'll automatically alert vessels when they cross a certain radius of an occupied haul-out. They'll get a little ding on their radio or something that informs them to maintain their distance. It's also interesting thing you can do is it in conjunction with satellite imagery to determine whether like these spots are occupied on a certain day. We can look at vessel traffic on that day to get after whether or not a disturbance event took place and identify a vessel that might have caused a disturbance in near real time. So kind of exciting new tools that we're exploring and hoping to employ this coming summer. Some of the big haulouts have also popped up right next to communities. In most years since around 2012, really big haulout sites have formed. The big one in Alaska is at Point Lay. You can see in this bottom image, it's about 50,000 walruses, about 3 miles from the community of Point Lay. In this top image, it's also about 50,000 walruses, about, a tenth of a mile from houses in this spot called Vankura in Russia. So this is kind of some of those numbers and us, but outreach by Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, and Eskimo Walrus Commission has helped to reduce and mitigate disturbances when these haulouts happen near communities. And in recent years, the communities themselves have taken an active role in stewardship and protecting animals at these haulouts. And that community members have also helped with haulout monitoring and carcass surveys in the past. The wildlife service is monitoring the harvest. So walrus harvest is really important to Alaskan and Chukota Native communities. Russia has a harvest quota for each community. Each community gets X number of walruses that they're allowed to harvest every year. Alaska doesn't. There's no established quota, and harvest is self-regulated by the communities. We work really closely with Alaska Native organizations and communities, organizations like the Eskimo Walrus Commission, to monitor the harvest, track harvest patterns, and make sure the harvest is happening within a sustainable range. The two walrus harvest monitoring programs, the mark tagging reporting program, and the walrus harvest monitoring program, which I'll just briefly explain. So our tagging reporting program looks at baseline walrus, sea otter, and polar bear harvest in Alaska. We have a network of local taggers in about 100 communities across Alaska. And they're trained up to tag tusks and hides for polar bears and sea otters. And interview hunters, they record biological information about the animals that were harvested, and that's reported back to our office. Non-native beach-found ivory is also tagged and monitored through a similar process. Getting your tusks tagged is a requirement under the MMPA, and there's generally good self-reporting rates in walrus hunting communities. Walrus harvest monitoring program is kind of an additional thing to that. It's an effort to provide more detailed harvest information in select communities during the peak hunting season. So it works. We seasonally employ a team of local monitors in Gamble and Savunga, which again are the two main hunting communities for walruses in Alaska. During the spring season, we'll meet hunting crews on the beach, interview them about the hunt, and collect biological samples. This program provides a clearer picture of the harvest, especially for calves and females and maybe walruses without tusks or animals that are less likely to get tagged. And it allows for us to estimate compliance with the mark tagging reporting program. This has been going on for a long time, every year since the 1990s, but they were in 2020. Around when it happened, there were some budget problems, and the program kind of fizzled out until we fought really hard to bring it back this past year in 2025. This past spring, myself and other members of the team spent time out on St. Lawrence Island in both Gamble and Savunga, hiring and training a team of about a dozen local monitors in each community. And we also met with captains and trained captains and hunters in sample collection. They generally did a really great job in monitoring the harvest and providing us some great information. Ice conditions were really, really tricky this past year, especially in Savunga. They had ice kind of locking them in for much of their traditional hunting season. Gamble got about an average harvest for them, and Savunga got maybe their lowest on record. But we got some great harvest information, and hunters got us some tissue samples that supported a variety of research projects. It was just a breakdown of the demographics of the walruses that each community got this past spring. So this past spring, hunters helped us gather samples for quite a few different research projects. They're testing some organs for harmful algal blooms, testing tissue for bird flu and COVID. We're also able to use skin samples from hunted animals. They're just as good as skin samples from live animals from our genetic marker capture work for the population abundance estimation project. There's a USGS study looking at female body condition, and a researcher at American University doing some contaminants and diet work with these tissue samples as well. Get a little bit sciencey here. So the most recent data points, generally speaking, we're looking at a large population of animals that we think is harvested within a sustainable range. We think there's 256,000 walruses out there, which is actually potentially more than previous estimates have estimated. But we don't know how climate change and human disturbance might affect the future status of the population. So, a couple years ago, Fish and Wildlife Service, Eskimo Walrus Commission, and USGS identified this need for a modeling framework, population modeling framework, that can assess the combined effects of climate change, human disturbance, and subsistence harvest for the population into the future. And this is originally what I was brought on to do as a contractor, and then wound up getting a full-time position about a year ago. It's fun. So this future population modeling effort, we kind of broke it into two different models. On the left, we have what's called a population consequence of climate change and disturbance model, or PCOD, where we're able to look at sea ice and how sea ice and human disturbance might affect the walrus population up to the end of the 21st century. This is as far as we're projecting out. This is connected to our other model, which is looking at harvest sustainability. So here we're looking at what levels of harvest will be sustainable under those climate and disturbance scenarios we looked at in the other model. It's a way of incorporating sea ice, human disturbance, and harvest to get projected population outcomes and also assess whether those harvest scenarios will be sustainable into the future. Throughout this modeling effort, we've worked alongside our partners at the Eskimo Walrus Commission and in Alaska Native communities. We're a piece of scientific knowledge we have using the best available scientific data in this model. But we identified information gaps that were best addressed by knowledgeable walrus hunters. So in August 2023, we had a workshop, a co-production and knowledge workshop, and with some hunters from Gamble and Savinga to co-produce some knowledge that fed right into some of the model parameters we're talking about. They provided input on walrus biology and behavior, climate stressors, and potential future scenarios that were really important for the model's development. And we wound up co-writing a paper about this workshop that we'll have a link for here at the end. But yeah, really, really cool opportunity to co-produce knowledge and incorporate indigenous knowledge into a population model. So population consequence of disturbance model. And I might not read all of these slides, it gets a little technical, but it's a bioenergetic model where we're simulating a female walrus's daily energy balance over the course of their life. Within all the information we know about walrus population dynamics, physiology, and behavior, both from the scientific literature and indigenous knowledge, we're able to relate energy use and mortality to the amount of sea ice walruses have available to them, along with the amount of human disturbance they encounter. Here we can build climate change and human disturbance scenarios to simulate what might happen to the walrus population in the future. very very basically, this is what the model looks like. Again, we're simulating all this. It's basically robot walruses. Um, we're simulating how much energy they get in from feeding, how much energy they put out through movement, metabolism, and pregnancy and growing a calf to ultimately get a daily probability of the calf and adult surviving to the next day. That's basically it looks like this. It's a series of really complex interconnected equations that are balancing daily energy gain and loss, but depend on a whole bunch of factors related to, yeah, how old, where the walrus is, its reproductive status, the time of year, etc. And in these equations, we're calculating things like growth rates, metabolic rates, reproductive parameters, and survival curves. This is what some of the model output looks like for one individual. On the top is the simulated mass of a female throughout the course of her life. On the bottom is the simulated mass of each calf and each reproductive attempt that she has. Yeah, this is basically what the model was able to output for an individual. Then the idea is that we run it for a couple 100,000 individuals to get some population level parameters. Here we're interested in carrying capacity and Rmax, which is the maximum intrinsic rate of population growth. So the idea was to calibrate a model to match baseline conditions and then look at some climate and disturbance scenarios in it. We were able to incorporate sea ice scenarios up to the end of the 21st century, looking at global climate models. In the model, walruses, the amount of ice walruses have nearby has an effect on their energy use and the probability they need to rest at a coastal haulout. So able to incorporate disturbance scenarios into this as well, thinking about how things like energy development and fisheries and commercial shipping lanes might affect the walrus population into the future. The model human disturbance is related to the daily amount of energy walruses lose by being disturbed. So we created a series of models ranging from combining a whole bunch of factors, but ranging from maybe the most optimistic scenario to the most pessimistic scenario. Here we have some output from that model looking at carrying capacity and Rmax to the end of the 21st century. The takeaway here is that all the scenarios we considered indicated declines to the population over time, ranging from around 10% to around 50%. And the severity of those declines was most heavily influenced by sea ice availability. But we also explored how conservation and management measures to protect walruses at haulouts and limit human disturbance can reduce the severity of a future population decline. The other part is looking at harvest sustainability, basically taking what we got from the sea ice and human disturbance model and exploring how different levels of harvest might continue to be sustainable under those climate and disturbance scenarios. Use a theta logistic population modeling approach based on some work that's been established for similar work in polar bears. Yeah, it's looking at different weather scenarios into the future, again up to end of the 21st century, incorporating output from that other model. And yeah, we're able to assess how different harvest levels might influence the population trajectory. We're also able to compare the population trend against predefined management objectives, looking at things like harvest sustainability and also a quasi-extinction threshold. But basically what we found is that contemporary or current levels of harvest were found to be sustainable up to the end of the 21st century, even under the most pessimistic climate and disturbance scenario. And generally, harvest had a small impact on the population relative to other factors like sea ice loss. So some general takeaways from this modeling effort. Walrus population is currently large and healthy. They've been experiencing some haulout mortality events and shift to species in recent years, which is somewhat concerning. So in a couple of years, when we have a new abundance estimate, we'll actually be able to compare it to last decade's abundance estimate to get a sense for whether the population is changing. The effort simulated moderate declines in the population of around 10 to 50% by the end of the 21st century, depending on the severity of various factors. Current levels of harvest are within a sustainable range, but hunters are already feeling the impacts of changing sea ice conditions in their harvest. Generally, we advocate for continued research, co-management, and conservation. It'll be crucial to ensure the population remains healthy and continues to be a reliable resource for hunters as well in a changing Arctic. All right. With that, hopefully you heard me okay towards the end there. Happy to take any questions. I can move this up. It has some links to the couple papers I talked about and also that documentary. And an article about visiting Round Island written by my sister, who's a Nat Geo photographer. But anyway.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Devin. Yeah, that was fantastic. The photos also were unbelievable. So thank you. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat. I will carry them to Devin. Teresa is asking that she says she knows there are a few new unexpected haulouts over the past couple of years, and if any of them are near Nome, and if so, what month?
So we've just started going through the kind of broad scale, looking at every historical haulout and also going off of people's observations and looking at new sites. And we have found a couple of new haulout sites in the past decade or so. No, although a lot more walruses on the Diomedes than has been documented previously. Back in the maybe 80s and 90s, they saw maybe 1,000 there, but not so many since then. In the images we're looking at, we think there's somewhere around 20 to 30,000 of them every year since 2016. So big haulout on Diomede, which is really interesting. There's also some newer haulouts in the Bristol Bay area around Eisenbeck, and between Cape League and Port Muller along that coast. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Linda is asking, she says, you briefly mentioned prey effects, but she was wondering if you could elaborate on the bottom-up effects of climate change on walrus prey.
So one thing we have a little less information for. We're able to, in our models, we just threw a kind of generalized forage quality parameter, looking at how changes to prey might affect the population. But there's some work we've done, like doing benthic invertebrate surveys, kind of looking at changes and shifts to where different species of clams and worms are. But it's all quite complicated and regionally specific. Walruses eat a whole lot of different benthic species. But so there's some general concerns about warmer temperatures, shifting distributions of prey, and also ocean acidification and its effects on mollusks and bivalves. So yeah, it's something that we're keeping an eye on, but there's some work being done on it. But there's not a very clear answer on this point at this point.
Thank you. And then Jennifer asked, how do you convey the results you find to people in the villages that collect the data for you?
Yeah, so we try to have as many community visits as we can. We unfortunately have a pretty limited travel budget, but we try to get out to St. Lawrence Island once a year. We try to do pre-season, pre-hunt meetings, talking to the communities about our findings over the past year and other walrus things that are happening, as well as to prepare them for the upcoming hunting season. Yeah, so with annual visits to St. Lawrence Island that we're doing. We're trying to get more community outreach to other walrus hunting communities as well. We'll be going out to Nukayavik and Wainwright here shortly on an outreach mission, and yeah, hoping we can do more of that into the future.
Thank you. Mike asks, did you consider the possible effects of human population shifts away from walrus harvesting communities and any decline in the walrus harvest?
Sort of skipped over this, but we've been doing analysis on our harvest data and finding some really sort of interesting things. My coworker is giving a talk at the Alaska Marine Science Symposium next week about it. We're hoping to have a paper about it at some point. But yeah, basically, there's some in the general we see in our data a strong decline in walrus hunting overall, and it's pretty significant for each individual community. There's some differences, but we're also seeing shifts in the demographics of walruses that get hunted. There's more males and fewer females than there used to be showing up in the harvest. So yeah, we have something to do with what walrus are available to hunters, but a lot of it could have to do with cultural shifts in the community as well. And part of that could be, some of the, population of hunters moving elsewhere.
Thank you. And then from Casey, we have, what's the best way to get to Round Island?
Yeah, it's not really easy to get there, but it is possible. So yeah, it's sort of Dillingham. The closest community is Togiak. And actually, if you follow this link here to this Round Island article, it goes over some of the more logistic specific stuff. But where we did it, I went in 2021 with my sister on a photography project. Fly Dillingham, small plane to Togiak, and then charter a boat from Togiak to Round Island. And usually these permits allow you to stay, I think, for 4 or 5 days.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up for the evening? These were great questions, actually. So thank you for your input there. If not, thank you so much, Devin. This was amazing. Yeah, it was a really, really well done presentation. And I know I learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone got quite a bit out of this. We'll be posting the recording on YouTube too, if anyone wants to rewatch or share it with their friends. It'll probably be up tomorrow. So thank you so much.
So
awesome. Thanks. Good night, everybody. Bye.